What is up, guys? Welcome to my review for Supergirl Season 3, Episode 15, titled In Search of Lost Time. So something I said in my review for the last episode and my trailer breakdown for this episode is that they should have started the return to the show with this episode, because the last episode just wasn't good enough to get them to bring the momentum of the show back in its first episode, and I definitely still hold that true, because this episode was great. It was a great episode, and it did definitely build up the momentum of the season, but it would have worked so much better if it was the episode that we came back on from that 2-month break that we were on from between February and April. So that was definitely something that bothered me a little bit, how they started the season again with the last episode, because this episode was really great. The only bad thing about this episode was the opening scene. It kind of sucked, but everything else about the episode was great, and that's what I'm going to talk about right now. First thing I want to talk about in this episode is Mon-El's costume. So I already talked about this costume in my trailer breakdown for this episode, and I talked about it for a while there in that episode because it's such a cool costume, and I will talk about it here again, but not for much. So this is such a cool costume that it actually brings up the score of the episode, because this is the episode where it's introduced, and I think that the fact that this episode gave us this costume makes it a little bit better. So the reason I like this costume, I mean, there isn't really a reason, but it just looks, first of all, it's very comic book accurate. Like, the costume in the comics is exactly the same, except for the blue lines that he has on his costume, which I think looks great. It adds a lot of detail to the costume that might be lacking from the comic costume, because that's just red, where here it's red and some blue weaved in, and it looks great. Which is another thing. Not only does it look extremely comic book accurate, to an extent, obviously, because of the blue I just mentioned, but not only that, it looks great. It's a great costume. It's one of my favorite Arrowverse costumes, honestly. Like, the Arrowverse, for some reason, is great at making red costumes, like the Flash from Season 4, and Arsenal, and Speedy, and now Mon-El. I love this costume so much, and because of it, because this costume is so good, because it was introduced in this episode, it honestly heightens the score of the episode. So in the last episode, there was this side plot with John and Mirren, and that continued in this episode, and I didn't think it was very good in the last episode. I honestly didn't really care. I didn't think that it gave us any good moments from the characters, and the storyline was just uninteresting, and maybe that was just because the last episode in general was pretty uninteresting, because in this episode, it was honestly really great. It was the main storyline of the episode, so maybe that focus on it gave it more chance for me to care for it, because it was great in this episode. It was honestly really great. All of the scenes between John Jones and Mirren Jones were great and amazingly acted from both actors, especially David Harwood, who plays Martian Manhunter, aka John Jones, and I predicted that we would probably get some pretty great moments from these actors in these scenes, but I just didn't really care about it in the last episode, and for some reason I did actually care about it in this episode. I thought it was actually really interesting how his Martian Alzheimer's was affecting people, like making them angry, which led to honestly some pretty great scenes. Like, there were some great fight scenes between the DEO and each other, and also those aliens, which we saw earlier in the episode, which I definitely thought, we saw them earlier in the episode, and I thought they're definitely going to escape from their cages, because there's no other reason they would show them, and it turns out they actually did. But there are other great scenes, like when Supergirl got angry at Mon-El because of two things: the thing that she's actually angry at him, or his past self, and the Mirren thing, which that happened twice, and both scenes were great. Or the second one was a lot better. And then there were scenes like where Wynn was arguing with that other DEO agent. These scenes were great, and the way they handled his condition in this episode was just so much more heartwarming and so much better than the last episode. But even without comparing it to the last episode, this storyline was honestly really great. It had a lot of heart to it, which I don't mean to compare it to the last episode again, but the last episode didn't really have any heart to it, in my opinion. This episode definitely did. But like I said, I don't want to really compare those two episodes anymore. I'm just saying that these scenes and this storyline was great. It gave us some great acting from a lot of actors, honestly. Thinking about it, this episode had a lot of great moments in them from just acting, like moments from David Harwood, who plays John Jones, moments from Melissa Benoist, and Chris Wood, who plays Supergirl and Mon-El, and a moment from Odette Annabelle, which came from a different storyline, and she plays Rain, and that she had some great moments as well. So this moment this episode really shined in terms of a lot of things, but mainly in terms of acting. This episode had amazing acting from basically every single actor. Not only that, it had a lot of heart to it. I know this sounds like a conclusion thing, but it's not. This is just my general opinion on the episode. Like this storyline, basically, is really what I'm talking about here. This whole storyline was funny at times, like that moment where Myron made that joke to John saying that he was playing with Zook, I think his name was. That was an actually funny moment. So it was pretty funny at times. It was heartfelt. It had a heart to it, and it was amazingly acted across the board. So honestly, this is an amazing storyline in this episode, and I don't know why it was so boring in the last one. So a side plot of the main storyline, it was very intertwined with the main storyline, and I already talked about it in the main storyline when Kara got angry at Mon-El, but the rest of the storyline of Mon-El training Kara is kind of a separate storyline, because storylines and side plots definitely connect to the main plot a lot of times in episodes. So this isn't not a side plot. I think it is still a side plot where Mon-El is training Kara to use her cape in a form of fighting, which it was pretty entertaining to watch them fight, because it gave us some pretty awesome fight scenes, especially at the end of the episode, which I did also talk about. But when she successfully used her cape at the end of the episode, it was honestly pretty satisfying to watch. I don't know why, but like seeing her fail throughout the episode and then succeeding at the end, that's just an awesome thing to watch, in my opinion, which is like something that this whole show has kind of not really done very often. They've kind of made Kara like this kind of Mary Sue character most of the time, who could do anything. So to see her failing and then succeeding at the end, is honestly a pretty cool thing to see. But all the moments we got from this storyline with Kara and Mon-El, and the fight scenes in the storyline were great. Like I didn't mention it briefly earlier, but the scene where Kara is like screaming at Mon-El and telling him how he was a terrible boyfriend last year to her, and 8 years ago to him, or 7 years ago. I don't really remember. But that was a great scene. It was incredibly acted by both actors, by Melissa Benoist and Chris Wood. Chris Wood didn't really do anything until the end of it, where he really showed emotion at the end, because the whole time he was just stiff, just listening. But at the end, you really see his emotion in the scene. So honestly, this is an amazing scene, and because of this scene and the main storyline and everything in the storyline, this honestly might be one of my favorite episodes from the show in general. So the title of this episode is In Search of Lost Time, and the storyline that's referring to is the Sam/Rain/Lena storyline, which, like I think I mentioned earlier about Odetta Annabelle's performance in this episode, it was a great storyline, because we saw, like, first of all, Sam learning that she is actually Rain. I don't remember if she knew it or not yet, but she fully accepted it in this episode. It was proven to her in this episode, and it was amazing to watch. The acting from the actress Odetta Annabelle, who plays Sam, when she realized she was Rain, it was great. Like I said, there were some great moments in this episode from people acting in this episode. Obviously, they act in every single scene, but like they really excelled in this episode for some reason, because maybe just because of what they were given to work with, because what they were given to work with was really good. But this whole storyline, except for maybe like these scenes with Lena and James, which weren't bad at all, they were fine, but the rest of the storyline with Sam and Lena was honestly pretty great, and it makes the Rain, or not really Rain, but Sam, such a sympathetic villain. Maybe a little too sympathetic, because if she like dies at the end of the season, it will actually feel like a character death, like a supporting character death, similar to like Tommy Merlin in season 1 of Arrow. Spoiler alert, but you probably already knew that. I mean, come on, but like that, it would be the equivalent, because like it's one of the main character's friends, and she dies because of the main villain, and the main villain is herself. But because it's a split personality type thing, it would be a pretty tragic death at the end of the season. I definitely think she should die, because there's no real reason she would stick around past the season. So I think that this could be our first real death scene on this show, because there has yet to be one, as far as I remember, from a supporting character. And even though she's a main villain, she's a supporting character as well, and that conflict within her, you see it in this scene, in these scenes, in this storyline. It worked so well. In conclusion, with the exception of maybe the crossover episode, this is honestly my favorite episode of the season. It may even surpass that. Even though I gave that a 10 out of 10, I'm giving this episode a 10 out of 10 as well, because honestly, it's basically perfect. The only thing I didn't like about it was the opening scene, but that's only one scene, and it wasn't bad either. It wasn't bad. I don't remember if I said it sucked early in the episode. It didn't really suck. It was whatever. It didn't really get me invested in the episode, which an opening scene doesn't really need to do, but it's nice. But that's really my only problem with the episode. Everything else was great. The Mon-El's costume reveal was amazing, or his costume in general, and the main storyline with Myron and his condition was just so much more interesting in this episode than the last episode, and it was handled really well, and it gave us some really well acted scenes from a lot of actors and actresses, which I mentioned earlier. Just every single storyline. The Kara Mon-El storyline was great. The Sam Lena storyline was great. The fight scenes were great, which is kind of odd, which is kind of out of ordinary for Supergirl. So I will give this episode a 10 out of 10. But let me know what you thought about this episode in the comments down below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and follow me on Twitter for better daily updates on my videos, as well as daily polls on the Arrowverse. And or if you don't have Twitter or you don't want to follow me, definitely click the notification icon next to the subscribe button, because YouTube really is working and it definitely helps. And thanks for watching.